Welcome, everyone. Today we have an extraordinary debate between two renowned thinkers from different eras discussing Lebanon's sectarian political system. Representing the case for a unified civic republic is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 18th century philosopher and author of The Social Contract. Opposing him, with the view favoring sectarian-based federalism, is Samuel P. Huntington, 20th century political scientist known for The Clash of Civilizations. Our topic: should Lebanon abolish its sectarian power-sharing system in favor of a single national identity, or move toward a federal system that empowers each sectarian community? Let's begin with opening statements. Monsieur Rousseau, please start by explaining why you believe Lebanon should end its sectarian system and embrace a single general will of the people.
Thank you. In my view, the essence of a true republic is the general will, the shared common interest of all citizens, taken together as one body politic. I have long argued that laws must express this general will and apply equally to all. In Lebanon's case, the current sectarian power-sharing system undermines that general will. Why? Because when citizens vote and act strictly as members of religious factions, Sunnis, Maronites, Shia, and so forth, they are pledging loyalty to a partial association rather than to the nation as a whole. This means their deliberations are guided by narrow sectarian interests instead of the bonheur commun, common good, of all Lebanese. I actually warned about this danger in my writings. When factions or brigues, cliques dominate politics, each group's will becomes general in relation to its members, while it remains particular in relation to the state. In other words, inside each sectarian bloc, people might feel a sense of common purpose, but that purpose is not aligned with the interest of the entire country. The result is that you no longer have as many independent citizens as you do factions. The general will fractures into multiple particular wills. This is precisely the case in Lebanon today. By dividing power and offices according to sect, the system encourages leaders to pursue sectarian interests at the expense of the common good. Laws and policies often end up favoring one community or the other, rather than all citizens equally.
So, you see the sectarian quota system as fundamentally at odds with a republic's ideals.
Exactly. True citizenship means shedding divisive labels. The social contract, as I envision it, should create a Lebanese citizen as the fundamental unit of the state, not a Sunni citizen or Maronite citizen, just a citizen equal under the law. In a genuine republic, every individual, regardless of religion, has the same rights and duties, and the laws represent the unified will of the people. Lebanon's current arrangement, however, enshrines religious labels into politics and public life. The presidency is reserved for one sect, the prime ministership for another, parliamentary seats are allocated by sectarian quotas, and so on. This legal sectarianism means that political loyalty and patronage networks form along communal lines. It's no surprise that corruption and nepotism thrive, because officials distribute resources to their sect, and voters expect sectarian patrons to take care of them, rather than holding leaders accountable for the nation's welfare. To me, this situation is the opposite of what a healthy republic should be. The general will can only emerge when citizens think of themselves as members of one great association, the nation, rather than as members of a faction. Therefore, I firmly believe Lebanon must abolish the institutionalized sectarian system. Only by doing so can you form a single people, un peuple unifié, where laws are made for the bonheur commun and apply equally to all. A central government deriving its authority from the united citizenry, not from a negotiated balance between sects, would encourage each voter to choose candidates based on competence and genuine political programs, economy, education, liberty, etc., not on which sectarian clan they belong to. In such a secular civic state, everyone's rights and responsibilities are the same. This fosters a patriotism based on country, not creed. I'm convinced that Lebanon will only achieve stability, justice, and true liberty when its people identify with the nation as a whole and subordinate their sectarian attachments to the common interest of all Lebanese.
Thank you, Rousseau, for that passionate argument for a unified civic nation. Now, Dr. Huntington, you have studied cultural and religious dynamics in politics. Why do you believe Lebanon's realities call for a sect-based federal system instead of Rousseau's unitary republic?
Thank you. Let me start by saying that Lebanon vividly illustrates what I have called a cleft country. By that, I mean a nation split by a deep civilizational fault line. In this case, a divide between major religious cultural communities. In Lebanon, the population is divided among Maronite and other Christian sects on one side, and Muslim sects, Sunni, Shia, Druze, etc., on the other. These communities each have rich histories, different cultural orientations, and strong identities. Politics in such a society is driven less by abstract ideology or policy platforms and much more by primordial loyalties, those deep bonds of faith and communal kinship. We see this in Lebanon's history. Time and again, people have mobilized politically as members of religious communities rather than as citizens of one nation. I appreciate Monsieur Rousseau's idealism, but we must be realistic about human social behavior, especially in a country like Lebanon. In the modern world, as traditional structures break down, people need new sources of identity, new forms of stable community to give them meaning and belonging. Often, religion fills that role. In Lebanon, sectarian communities have long provided people with their primary sense of identity and solidarity. A Maronite villager in the mountains of Lebanon, for example, derives comfort, social support, and a feeling of belonging from their Maronite community and church. The same goes for a Shiite farmer in the south or a Sunni merchant in Beirut with their respective communities. These ties are deeply emotional and historical. Expecting citizens to suddenly ignore these bonds and vote merely as abstract Lebanese individuals, as Rousseau suggests, is, I fear, highly unrealistic. It goes against the social reality on the ground.
So you're suggesting that sectarian identities can't simply be erased by a new system.
Precisely. History has shown us how powerful these identity bonds are. Let's not forget, Lebanon experienced a brutal civil war from 1975 to 1990, largely along sectarian lines. That war happened because the various communities feared domination by each other and because a single national identity could not contain those tensions. Each side had militias rallying people under sectarian banners. This is a classic example of what I termed the clash of civilizations on a smaller internal scale. When groups with fundamentally different cultures or religions coexist in one state, political competition easily turns into a zero-sum conflict along those cultural lines. In Lebanon, when one community gained more power, the others felt existentially threatened, as if their way of life was at stake. This dynamic has repeatedly disrupted attempts to enforce a unified civic identity in Lebanon. Given this reality, I argue for a pragmatic solution, a form of federalism based on sectarian communities. By federalism, I mean empowering each major sectarian community to largely govern its own affairs within its own region or canton. For example, the Christian-majority areas could have their own regional government, Muslim-majority areas theirs, and so on, all under an overarching Lebanese state. How would this help? It would reduce the stakes of the struggle for central power. If each community knows it has autonomy over key aspects of its life, say education, personal status laws, marriage, inheritance, etc., local administration, culture, then losing a bit of influence in the central government is less alarming. Each sect would have a sense of security that its identity and rights won't be trampled by a domineering majority at the national level, because it governs itself in critical ways.
And what would be the effect on politics under such a federal scheme?
Politics would likely become normalized within each community. Right now, leaders often whip up fear of the other sect to rally their base and deflect criticism. Under federalism, Maronite leaders, for instance, would govern Maronite regions and thus would have to deliver good governance to their own Maronite constituents. They could no longer blame another sect for their community's problems. Accountability would improve. If a politician from Sect A is corrupt or ineffective, the voters of Sect A will see the results directly and hold them accountable, rather than that politician distracting them by saying, "It's Sect B's fault, our region is in shambles." In essence, Federalization could convert a dangerous intersectarian competition, sect versus sect at the central level, into a healthier intrasectarian competition, political rivalry within each community to better serve their people. Each community can focus on its own development, and officials will be judged by their performance rather than their ability to secure sectarian spoils from the central government. Ultimately, a federal Lebanon aligns governance with the social reality of multiple distinct communities. It may well be the only way to keep Lebanon peaceful and functional in the long run. Such an arrangement gives each civilization or cultural community its own space to flourish, while still preserving a framework of coexistence at the top for matters of common interest, like national defense, foreign policy, major economic infrastructure, etc. This way, Lebanon remains a single country, but one that acknowledges and respects its internal diversity, rather than pretending those divisions don't exist or trying to force them into a unitary mold overnight.
Thank you, Dr. Huntington. You've made a case that Lebanon's sectarian identities are deeply rooted and need to be accommodated politically through federalism. Now, let's move to some back and forth. Monsieur Rousseau, what is your response to Huntington's argument that a single civic identity in Lebanon is unrealistic and that federalism would actually stabilize the country by respecting sectarian differences?
My response is that what he calls realism, I would call a self-fulfilling defeatism. It's true that sectarian identities in Lebanon are powerful. I do not deny the social reality. But why are they so powerful? In part because the political system constantly reinforces them. If, from birth, you are categorized as a member of a sect and taught that your community's survival depends on holding a share of state power, of course you will cling to that identity politically. The general will has never been given a real chance to form in Lebanon precisely because the system erects walls between communities. I acknowledge it would be difficult to transition to a non-sectarian system, but difficulty alone shouldn't disqualify the principle of equality. Good governance sometimes requires overcoming deep-rooted habits. Huntington's proposal, in my view, essentially formalizes the divisions in Lebanese society. Federalism along sectarian lines would turn the country into a mere federation of sects, not a nation of citizens. It fragments the great association of people that a republic is supposed to unify. I fear that if you give each sect its own region and government, you're no longer fostering loyalty to Lebanon as a whole. Instead, you risk each region becoming more insular. The social contract should bind all individuals together directly under one general will. Federalism breaks that single social contract into several smaller contracts, one for Maronites, one for Sunnis, one for Shia, etc. Does Lebanon then remain one country in anything but name? Or does it become, say, three little pseudo-states coexisting under a weak umbrella? I worry that rather than peace, this could lead to an eventual full partition, a permanent separation of communities, maybe even hostility if one region feels another is encroaching on its interests.
Huntington, do you want to reply to that concern? Rousseau is cautioning that your plan might cement divisions and erode any sense of national unity or common purpose.
Certainly, Monsieur Rousseau's concern is valid in theory. Federalism can lead to less national cohesion, but I would argue Lebanon currently has very little national cohesion to begin with. We have to compare against the status quo. Right now, Lebanon's system is a kind of forced power sharing, where each sect gets a slice of the pie. This hasn't produced true unity. It has produced gridlock and mutual vetoes. The country has limped along with periodic crises precisely because there is no single national will, just negotiated compromises among sect leaders. So we already have a weak national identity in practice.
My proposal would at least stabilize governance. Yes, it acknowledges divisions, but it also could reduce conflict. Look at it this way. The alternative Rousseau is advocating, shedding sectarian labels and treating everyone just as Lebanese, is a noble ideal, but trying to enforce that abruptly might actually provoke chaos. If tomorrow the sectarian quotas were abolished, the largest groups, say the Muslims collectively, or even one Muslim sect, could dominate parliament and the presidency through sheer numbers. Then the smaller communities, feeling threatened, might rebel or secede. We've seen similar things in history. When one group fears being ruled by another, they often choose conflict over submission. Lebanon's own past is testament to this fear. So immediately implementing a pure one-person, one-vote secular democracy in Lebanon could ignite the very civil strife we want to avoid as communities panic about their future. Federalism, on the other hand, is a compromise. It says, we are different, yes, but we will cooperate under a federal roof. It is an attempt to balance unity and diversity. The hope is that over time, with each group feeling secure, you could actually cultivate more relaxed interactions between communities, maybe even a gradual strengthening of a shared Lebanese identity, but built on trust, not on force.
May I interject a point here?
Go ahead, Rousseau.
Mr. Huntington mentions that abolishing quotas might let one group dominate and spark unrest. But consider why domination is feared. It's because communities assume the state will be captured to serve the winner's sectarian interest. This fear exists only because politics is seen as sectarian to begin with. In a true republic of equal citizens, a Shiite or Sunni leader would have to govern for all Lebanese, not just for his sect, because the rules would demand equality. The general will, by definition, is aimed at the common good of everyone. If a leader started favoring only their sect, citizens across the board would reject that as illegitimate. I admit this is an ideal and would require a civic culture that Lebanon currently struggles with. But civic cultures can develop. They are not static. For example, in countries like France, over centuries people shifted from identifying primarily with their religious or provincial community to identifying as French citizens first. This was a painful process at times, but Republican education, civil institutions, and national civic ideals eventually created a strong common identity out of very divided parts. Religious wars, regional differences, etc., were overcome. I believe Lebanon could embark on a similar path with patience and statesmanship, especially by investing in national civic education that emphasizes what Lebanese share rather than what divides them. The risk of federalism is that you give up on ever forging a common identity. If Maronites, Sunnis, Shias each govern themselves separately, what incentive do they have to think of themselves as one people? You might stabilize the peace in the short term, but at the cost of permanently institutionalizing fragmentation. To me, that's too high a price. It's like surrendering the very idea of a unified Lebanon. And consider minorities within each region. If each sect governs its own area, those who belong to a different faith but live there could feel like second-class citizens. For example, imagine a Shia living in the Maronite region or a Christian in the Sunni region. Would they be truly equal in that local society? A republic that recognizes only individual citizens and not sectarian groups would protect everyone's rights uniformly by law, no matter where they live or what their religion. That is a clearer path to justice and liberty for all, rather than sorting people by their sect.
Huntington, do you have a rebuttal?
Those are thoughtful points. I agree that a common civic identity is a wonderful goal, and that federalism might slow its formation. But my perspective comes from studying many divided societies, and often a gradual approach works better than an abrupt one. Perhaps federalism in Lebanon need not be permanent or absolute. It could be a way to manage conflict now, and maybe in a generation or two, as trust rebuilds, the system could evolve toward more integration. Think of it as a pragmatic peace mechanism. You mentioned France's journey. Indeed, it took a long time and even involves suppressing certain identities to forge a French nation-state. In Lebanon, any forceful attempt by the state to suppress sectarianism, like outlawing political sectarianism outright, could be seen by communities as an attack. We can't ignore that external regional powers also play on these sectarian ties, another complication. Until a Lebanese national feeling genuinely overcomes the sectarian feeling, a federal structure might prevent violence and give people good governance within their own community.
Also, let's consider examples. Some countries have found stability through federal or consociational arrangements in multi-ethnic or multi-sectarian contexts. Switzerland, for instance, had religious, Catholic versus Protestant, and linguistic divides. It developed a federal system with cantons and a power-sharing government, and over time, a Swiss national identity did emerge alongside local identities. Belgium, more recently, has effectively federalized between its linguistic communities to reduce constant friction. These models suggest that acknowledging differences can be compatible with overall unity if managed carefully. In Lebanon's case, federalism doesn't mean zero interaction or zero national identity. It just means most day-to-day governance is handled within each community, while the nation-state takes care of common interests. If anything, this could make national politics less tense. Right now, every decision at the central government level is fraught with sectarian calculations. In a federal Lebanon, the central government would have fewer but more focused responsibilities, like defense, currency, major public works, and it could perhaps function more smoothly since each community knows its core interests at home are safeguarded.
We're hearing two very distinct approaches. One aiming for an immediate unitary civic nation, another advocating a federated coexistence as a stepping stone or end in itself. Before we wrap up, let's allow each of you a brief closing remark. Rousseau, your final thoughts.
My final thought is this. Liberty and the public welfare in Lebanon ultimately demand one people united under laws that represent the general will. I deeply respect Mr. Huntington's concern for peace and stability. No one wants a return to violence in Lebanon, but I believe lasting stability comes from legitimacy, and legitimacy comes from justice and equality. A system that categorizes and separates its citizens by sect can never be truly just or fully legitimate in the eyes of all. It will breed resentment, clientelism, and a feeling of us versus them indefinitely. I urge the Lebanese to have the courage to become citizens first and foremost. This means taking the hard step of phasing out sectarian quotas and building a state that treats everyone the same. Through civic education, legal reforms, and perhaps a transitional period of careful safeguards, Lebanon can transform. It can move from a pact of sects to a social contract of citizens. Only by doing that will the Lebanese people be able to deliberate together for their common good, and only then will their government truly work for the happiness and freedom of all, not just a faction. In sum, Lebanon must become a genuine republic of equal individuals if it is to secure both liberty and prosperity for future generations.
Thank you, Rousseau. Dr. Huntington, your closing statement.
I will conclude by reiterating the importance of realism and cultural respect in designing political systems. I do not oppose the ideal of national civic unity. It is a fine aspiration. But my study of civilizations and conflicts warns me that pushing grand ideals in the face of deeply entrenched identities can backfire. Lebanon's sectarian communities are not mere illusions. They are authentic social organisms that have survived for centuries. They provide meaning, support, and identity to their members. A wise political arrangement doesn't try to wish these facts away, but rather builds upon them to avoid conflict. Sectarian-based federalism is not about dividing people maliciously. It's about giving each community confidence that it won't be dominated or erased. With that confidence established, communities may gradually become more open to cooperation, and maybe, over time, a stronger national identity will emerge organically. But you cannot simply legislate away people's primordial attachments overnight. In a federal Lebanon, everyone remains Lebanese, and the country remains one internationally recognized state. The difference is that governance is decentralized in a way that mirrors the existing social fabric. This can channel potential sectarian clashes into more positive channels. It's a bit like pressure valves. Instead of one superheated arena at the national level, you have multiple smaller arenas where issues can be dealt with locally. Corruption and bad governance, as I mentioned, would be more transparent to each community's voters, hopefully leading to better leadership across the board. And importantly, peace is preserved because no group fears being at the mercy of another. In conclusion, Lebanon can survive and thrive not by ignoring its pluralism, but by embracing a form of pluralism in its state structure. This, I believe, is the surest path to avoiding future conflict and allowing each sect to live in dignity while still sharing a country. It may not fulfill the philosophical ideal of one indivisible general will, but it might just keep the peace and stability that the Lebanese so desperately need.
Thank you, Dr. Huntington, and thank you, Monsieur Rousseau. This has been a fascinating debate exploring two very different prescriptions for Lebanon's political future, one rooted in universal civic republicanism, the other in accommodating cultural realities through federalism. To our audience, we've heard arguments for forging a single national identity to express the general will, and counter-arguments that emphasize the enduring power of sectarian identities and the need to structure the state around them. It's a complex issue with no easy answer, but thoughtful discussions like this can help inform the path forward. Thank you all for listening to this special dialogue across time.